Well, welcome back to another week's analysis behind the news. I don't know how many of you noticed this past week and got as incensed as I did over the comments of our former commander in Iraq, in the Middle East, and Afghanistan, General Petraeus. In fact, I want to start repronouncing his name and using the word Petraeus rather than Petraeus. The man is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He's been to Bilderberg meetings and that sort of thing. But he said this last week in a meeting. Former General and CIA Chief David Petraeus, a key figure in the globalist Council on Foreign Relations and shadowy Bilderberg network, boasted at a recent conference that the United States of America is set to be merged into the continental regime being erected under the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, into what became the nickname of the North American Union, where they're trying to merge the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And most of you are aware of this initiative. And Petraeus is part of this. He says, this is a direct quote, "After America comes North America," he said, in answering the question about what is next for the United States. So here we have a man who belongs to the globalist New World Order organization, the Council on Foreign Relations, is in bed with all these globalists, who was in charge and commander of our troops in the Middle East. He wasn't just our commander in Afghanistan and Iran and that sort of thing. He was the commander over the whole Middle East, clear on through the subcontinent of Asia, over our armed forces at that time. And so it kind of tells you what is behind a lot of the things that are going on in these countries that just seem to be all confused and mixed up. And as we've always said in these broadcasts, if you take a look at the idea that they're trying to build a new world order, then everything else makes sense. Otherwise it won't. It'll look contradictory and everything. We see Kerry, for instance, going to Iraq and saying we need a change in government in Iraq. Here's another one in the Financial Times. Kerry calls for new government in Iraq. Of course, that's up to us to do that, isn't it? Say you're an individual, you live in a nice little neighborhood, everybody gets along, but you've heard about a couple on the street over in that neighborhood that don't get along. So it's up to you to go over there and beat up the old guy in that house and tell him to get out and put somebody else in charge of that home. Maybe you don't like him to the extent that you go over there and you shoot him and bury him in the backyard. Is it any business of yours as to what goes on over there relative to you going over and taking such high-handed action in that regard, or even pulling everybody out into the neighborhood street and saying, hey, look, this couple doesn't get along. We need to get together here as a neighborhood and decide what should be going on inside that house. Now, if you don't have that power to do that, you don't have that power to delegate it to government to do it to another government. That's simple. A free people do not have that kind of power, should not have that kind of power. But our government thinks that it can go anywhere in the world and be the policeman of the world in demanding this and demanding that. Every time we demand something, it gets worse, doesn't it? And then we take a look at the fact that now ISIS is starting, that's the group that's moved out of Syria into Iraq and is taking over half of Iraq and half of Syria. And it says ISIS claims supremacy among militants. See, what has happened now as a result of their success in Iraq, they are saying now that we are the big boys on the block. Now we are the bosses. We're going to control everything. And it says militants leverage gains in Iraq to tighten hold in Syria. That's what I was saying. That they're taking these successes and saying to the rest of the extremists, the rest of these jihadists, we are now the big boy. We are now the boss. Again, militants leverage Iraq gains in Syria in the Wall Street Journal. So what's happening is that these militants that we've helped arm have come into Iraq, as we have explained in the past, and started to take over that country. Now we see something very interesting going on, because now we see, according to the Wall Street Journal, that the United States is set to train and arm these rebels in Syria. Now, these people that were worried about ISIS in Iraq are bad guys now. But now they're taking over all the rebels in Syria, and now Obama and Kerry and everybody else wants to go arm and train these people. Does this make any sense? It does if you understand the main premise, and that is to build a new world order by ever larger and larger regional governments. This is forming a regional government, is it not? They want to take over Jordan, they want to take over Syria, they want to take over parts of Turkey, they want to take over Iraq, even I think the island of Cyprus. I might be mistaken on that, but I think it's Cyprus that they want. And form another regional government as just another linchpin in forming, out of regionalism, a new world order. And actually what they should be doing is shrinking some of those countries. You know, these countries were imposed upon the people by the United States and Britain after World War I. We said, now this is a country and we're going to draw the lines here, and that's a country, we're going to draw the lines there, never taking into the fact that they were different tribes, different religious sects of Islam or anything else. We just arbitrarily told them, now this is your country, instead of allowing them to determine what their country's boundaries would be. The Kurds for the Kurds, and the Sunnis for the Sunnis, and the Shiites, etc., for themselves. But we imposed that on them and messed it up to begin with, and now we're going in there and messing it up some more. And you know what's happening? Most of you know, the Iraq Christians are being decimated. What Christians were left after of what we did to Iraq, and we literally destroyed Christianity in Iraq as a viable entity. Now what's left is being forced to either be killed or pay a tax to be a Christian to this ISIS group. And this is the sort of thing that's happening to Christianity throughout the Middle East, in conclaves and cities and sects that have been there for 2,000 years in these countries. Our policies are destroying those Christians, whether it's the Copts in Egypt or the Christians in Iraq, Syria, and everywhere else, because the people are getting mad at our Christian nation going in there and beating them up and telling them what to do and making it worse than what it was to begin with. These are the things that are going on. So you keep that in mind, is that this is always done to form a new world order, particularly when you have a man such as General Petraeus, who is a new world order guy in charge of all the military in the Middle East and then in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's what's happening. We are sending our men and women in harm's way to do something that's entirely different from what they're selling us as being the main purpose. Keep all these things in front of you as you read your newspapers over the ensuing weeks, because this is going to be very interesting as we go forward. Until next week, we'll see you then.